Welcome and good time of day to you. Today we're going to talk about nonviolent communication, the language of life based on feelings and emotions rather than judgments. We have to observe without evaluating, which can be very difficult because the media predisposes us to violence, making moralistic judgments and to have justice be inextricably linked to these judgments. When we do things, we have to do it out of a need to contribute to life and not out of punitive retribution or other such things. Because a demand is an implicit threat. You can't make anyone do anything. As Marshall Rosenberg says, he could make his 2-year-olds do something, but they would immediately make him regret that he had made them do something. So we need to find a more inclusive method of conveying our needs and understanding the needs of others through empathy. And the use of pronouns is important. Rather than you are disgusting, it can be I feel disgusted because I. And it takes the judgment out. So we spend a lot of time talking about needs and it sounds like, it feels like, rather than making anything that has a built-in implicit threat or demand. The analogy is the jackal honesty against giraffe honesty. The jackal is much more direct and hurtful, manipulative, all of these things, what we've been conditioned to do from media since birth, really, when what we want is giraffe honesty. And good animal choices, I have to say. Not much more peaceful than a giraffe. Unless the males are fighting, then it gets pretty impressive, really. But nevertheless, giraffes are our metaphor for being in touch with the needs of others, the needs of ourselves, how to convey them, how to be grateful, how to express anger, etc. Responsibility. In order to be responsible, you have to be response-able. See the cleverness there? So we need to be able to be responsive in order to hold responsibility in a equanimous manner. I feel because I. It takes all of the sting out of what you're trying to express, and it makes it much easier for someone else to hear it truly. Judgment is a tragic expression of an unmet need. A lot has to do with unmet needs, and a lot of anger stems from being out of touch with the nature of our needs and the inability to express them and seek reconciliation. If we hear criticism, we are more likely to counterattack. So you have to hear the wants and needs of the other person and not interpret the criticism, because it feeds a cycle of aggression. So we have to translate these judgments into the needs in order to properly express them. Now, a need contains no reference to specific people taking specific actions. That's a big one. Saying who has to do what, all of a sudden, it's a demand. It's no longer an expression of need. The language of needs, the good news is that we don't have that many. We need love, community, autonomy, meaning and purpose, and most important, contribution. Those sound surprisingly similar to Tony Robbins' needs, doesn't they? His expression of what all people need. So they're very similar, slightly different words, but it does appear to be a universal human truth of these fundamental requirements of our emotions. So we have to respect our own needs in order for others to take them seriously. If you have this apologetic demeanor, then how is anyone else going to take it seriously? You have to be confident in what you need in order to express that to anyone else. Good way of saying things is, I'm sad because my need is very strong for something, rather than what you did made me sad, because that just triggers all kinds of defensiveness and it sounds like an attack, and people are likely not to even hear what you say, or they're likely to completely mishear, as we saw in the Tony Robbins things as well. Positive language means that what we do, not what we don't. What we do want rather than what we don't want. So again, not focusing on the negative. Ironic, he calls it nonviolent communication. Perhaps it should be compassionate communication, so we don't trigger the neurons for our associations with violence. But we often use vague language about how others should be without naming a concrete action that they could take to satisfy our needs. So again, the same pervasive thing of really evaluating what needs we need to have met and to bridge the gap with someone else in the most productive possible way, without judgment, without blame, without guilt. All of these good things. It's important to be mindful of how we react to people not understanding us, because requests are important, not demands. Would you be willing to set the table? So much better than set the table. Doesn't even acknowledge someone else's autonomy. You never want to put the but in the face of an angry person. I like that one. Of course, it means the word but it does make some very compelling imagery to sink the message home. Anyone can be very upset when they hear a but, because it usually tends to negate whatever good was just said. So finding ways to say things without that unfortunate conjunction is a good tactic when practicing nonviolent communication. How and when to bring a dead conversation back to life. He suggests that we should stop a conversation when we've heard one more word than we want to hear. And it's not to claim the floor, but to connect with someone else's wants. Now, this is interesting because it's almost identical to Chris Voss's expression of labeling, how it's important to capture with the same idea, with it sounds like, it feels like, just direct statements about the way a situation appears or feels, and is much more likely to be accepted in a receptive manner. When internally violent towards ourselves, it's difficult to be genuinely compassionate towards others. So we've been conditioned to think violently, and even towards ourselves. So getting that connection is going to be very difficult if we're disingenuous with our own requirements and our own needs. Then when we do this, when we are judgmental towards ourselves, we lose the beauty in us. And that is probably one of the most common things if you just think about it. It's very, very easy in the age of Instagram to forget our own inner beauty, but it should be celebrated. Now, we don't want to be a perfectionist. We just want to consistently improve. And there's a fantastic phrase, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Because if we focus on things with a perfectionist mindset, we're more likely to not even try for fear of those mistakes. I've certainly been guilty of that, especially in the making of music. I don't hear the good in the music that I've written. I only hear the shortcomings into what it could be. So because of that, I've failed to even try. But that should be fixed. Violent words. There's lots of words that are incognito violent, such as should. The word should can be thought of as a violent word because it resists learning and it implies that you don't have any choice. I should do this. I should have had this. I should make this happen. These are all expressions that imply that there's a duty and it's not free will. And thus it's not as constructive. It's really difficult to make progress if you deny your own autonomy to make progress. Even hard work has an element of play in it. We would like to do everything in a way that's more genuine and more productive. And so, just like seeing the beauty in us, it's important to have an element of play in the things that perhaps we would rather not do. Rather than saying we should do something, it's I choose to do that thing, and all of a sudden it takes on a new life. Actions performed out of guilt or shame lose importance. Guilt is a killer. And it really diminishes our own significance if we're not doing something because we choose to do it, if we're not getting the benefit because it's something that we do of our own free will, and it can lead to resentment and all kinds of negative emotions. So it is important to say, I choose to do these things. The inner monologue can completely shift the perception of what's happening. Resolutions can be reached with sufficient empathy. Empathy is key for bridging the gap and coming to conclusions to make sure both sides are really actually communicating and actually getting the point of what it might be causing any sort of conflict or resentment or anger. It allows it to be aired out and resolutions found. Force can be used protectively or punitively. Protective force is to prevent injustice. So running out in the street to save someone is a protective use of force, and it's not accompanied with any sort of blame. It's not diminishing to that person because it's done without judgment. Whereas punitive is a psychological or